National security is about military power, but there's more than that. America's strength also comes from the power to use diplomacy. In October 1945, President Harry Truman, my favorite president, changed the seal of the office of the president to have the eagle face the olive branches of diplomacy instead of the arrows of war, signifying that America would always prefer that we use diplomacy first. In modern times, our judgments to go to war rather than use diplomacy have been flawed. And under this administration, diplomacy, in my view, is under assault, and that's why I rise today. We see a decimated state and USAID budget. We see bellicose rhetoric from the president. We see efforts to undermine publicly American diplomats engaged in negotiations. And we see the refusal to even nominate key State Department diplomatic appointees. As of last week, the administration had not put forward a nominee for approximately 52% of high-level positions at the State Department that require approval by the Senate. 32 countries do not yet have ambassadors in place, and that includes no nomination from the White House for ambassadors to key countries like South Korea, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. No one's been nominated for Assistant Secretary of Arms Control, for Assistant Secretary for International Security and Nonproliferation, for Assistant Secretary for Near East Affairs, Assistant Secretary for South and Central Asian Affairs, or East Asian and Pacific Affairs. How serious can the administration be about nuclear threats with no ambassador to South Korea or no ambassadorial nomination for the key State Department official around nonproliferation? And the president has repeatedly undercut his Secretary of State's diplomatic efforts with North Korea. President Trump's most recent action, his recent attack on diplomacy, is the decision to decertify the Iran deal. And I think this could be the most dangerous yet. Third, Mr. President, I worry about the timing of this effort to step away from the Iran deal with respect to the imminent threat. I hear concerns about the Iran deal, what Iran might be able to do in year 8 or year 10 or year 15. Let me tell you about something I'm worrying about this month, and that's the North Korean nuclear program. Mr. President, we've been in briefings, and we hear the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State say to us and say to the world, the U.S. will always push for a diplomatic solution. We're never out of diplomatic solutions. But let's be candid. What are the chances of a diplomatic solution with North Korea that would end or dramatically limit their nuclear weapons ambitions? I don't think the chances are high. I'd say that they're 20% at best. They're not zero, but they're not high either. But don't we owe it to the American public, and don't we owe it to our troops, that if there's any chance of a diplomatic negotiation and a diplomatic end to this program, that we would seek to exhaust and explore it? Of course we do. And yet every time Secretary of State Tillerson talks about trying to have some diplomatic outcome, to pressure the Chinese to use leverage against North Korea, the president pours cold water on him. And I would argue that stepping back from the Iran deal sends an unmistakable signal to North Korea. If I'm right, and there's even a small chance of a diplomatic resolution, but the message we send to North Korea is the U.S. will back out of a nuclear deal even when it's being complied with, I think we drive the chances of a diplomatic resolution with North Korea down to zero, and we should not do that.
Deputy Secretary John Sullivan continued his official bilateral engagements with the Republic of Korea on October the 19th. He met with the National Security Advisor Chung to discuss concrete ways to address the DPRK threat, improve U.S. ROK economic ties, and coordinate on other important regional and global issues. The deputy also exchanged views with a group of DPRK defectors and also to learn more about life and perspectives inside of North Korea. Deputy Secretary Sullivan enjoyed engaging staff at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. He also spoke with our people at the U.S. Consulate in Busan. He addressed U.S. foreign policy priorities in the region and wanted to convey a deep appreciation to the American and local staff who advance those priorities. Additionally, during his visit, he went to the Yongsan Garrison and the demilitarized zone with U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Brooks. The deputy saw firsthand the acute threat posed by North Korea, and he also enjoyed exchanging views with our U.S. forces who are stationed there.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this critically important hearing and to the excellent witnesses that we have before us today. This week, the New York Times published an article, and I'm going to submit it for the record, assuming there's no objection, which details North Korea's cyber attacks that are estimated to provide the North Korean government with as much as $1 billion a year. That figure is staggering. It's equivalent to 1/3 of that country's total exports. North Korea's ransomware attacks and cyber attacks on banks around the world are producing a funding stream for that country, which in turn fuels its nuclear program. And it is a funding source that must be stopped at a time when the United States is leading efforts to sanction exports of coal, labor, textiles, and other products in order to hinder North Korea's nuclear ambitions. We also have to be focusing on additional funding sources, and this cash flow ought to be priority number one. Tough rhetoric must be supported by tough action and practical measures that make clear to North Korea that this kind of conduct will be answered. So the question is, what actions are being taken to combat their offensive cyber operations and address this cyber revenue? And I know that you may not be fully at liberty to discuss these steps in this forum, but I'd like you to do so to the extent you can, because North Korea knows what it's doing. You're not going to reveal anything to North Korea. The American people deserve to know what North Korea is doing, and they don't. So this is a topic that I think ought to be front and center for the administration and for the Congress and for the American people, and I look forward to your responses.
I would simply say yes, Senator. We do have plans and capabilities that are focused and directed on the North Korean threat in general and on the specific activities that you have noted. I think that it would be most appropriate if we're going into detail to do that in closed session.
Senator, I would just say that we continue to work with our foreign partners in information sharing wherever possible when we're able to assist them in identifying these types of criminal activities. We provide them also technical assistance whenever asked, or engaging with them in joint operations. And whenever possible, we are always looking to link it back or coordinate some indictment or investigative some joint operation that would bring to light the people or the nation states that are conducting those activities.
I'll pile on here, and I actually provide a little bit of detail on a particular unclassified activity. Working very closely with the FBI, we've designated one effort called Hidden Cobra, and on US CERT we have a Hidden Cobra page that speaks to a botnet infrastructure, command and control infrastructure, that has certain indicators that, hey, look at this, go track this down, working with federal partners where some of that command and control infrastructure may be in another country. We've shared that information with them, and we're looking to take action against it. So this is not just a whole of government approach. This is an international problem with international solutions, and we're moving out aggressively. And this is a recent last few weeks where we've been able to partner with some unlikely partners.
I agree that it's an international problem with international solutions, but we provide the main solution, and we are, in effect, victims substantially, if not primarily, of the problem. And I understand, Mr. Rapuano, that we have plans and capabilities. I'm not fully satisfied with the idea that those forward-oriented measures of action are sufficient. I think we need action here and now. The Lazarus Group, North Korean-linked cybercrime ring, stole $81 million from the Bangladesh Central Bank account at the New York Federal Reserve. which would have been $1 billion, but for a spelling error, a fairly rudimentary spelling error on the part of the North Koreans. They've also been tied to the WannaCry attack earlier this year and the Sony attack in 2014. This week, they are being linked to a $60 million theft from the Taiwanese bank. Measured in millions, given the way we measure amounts of money in this billion, which in this week with our budget is in the billions and trillions, may seem small, but it is substantial given the North Korean economy and its size. So I'm hoping that in another setting, we can be more fully briefed on what is being done now to stem and stop this threat. And I appreciate all of your good work in this area. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.